What if I told you there's something even more iconic than Huntrix, and it's the food?
What? No.
Join me as I deep dive into some of the most iconic foods of K-pop demon hunters, starting with one of my favorites. The first iconic food is Gimbap, or as I've come to learn, Gimbap. Let me explain. Now let's start with the basics. Kim or Gim means seaweed in Korean, and bap means rice. So Gimbap or Gimbap literally means seaweed rice. But that simple name hides behind century of history. According to the Encyclopedia of Korean Folklore and Food Culture, yes, I dove really deep into this one, seaweed became part of Korean cooking in the 1600s after the second Manchu invasion in 1636. A medic named Kim Yo-ik discovered seaweed clinging to the branches of a driftwood oak tree. Soon after, dishes using seaweed began appearing in old Korean texts. The lore behind this is insane, but the making of gimbap is actually pretty simple. Traditionally, it's made from short grain rice, similar to what you would find in sushi. But I've also seen it done with multigrain or even brown rice, so if that's your preference, just use that. All you need to do to get the rice started is wash it till it runs clear and then measure out however much water you need, making sure you use the ancient Asian tradition of measuring to the first knuckle for the water. During the Japanese occupation of Korea from 1910 to 1945, Japanese maki rolls were introduced to the people of Korea. But Koreans really did make it their own. Instead of using vinegar rice, they used sesame oil and salt, which completely changes the flavor. Instead of raw fish, they used cooked ingredients like pickled radish, stir-fried carrots, egg garnish, bulgogi, ham, crab meat, or even spinach, which is really traditional. Gimbap became super vibrant, hearty, and uniquely Korean. It's not just Korean-style sushi. Even the name has a story. The earliest known printed use of gimbap appears in a 1935 issue of Dang Al-Ibo. It's a newspaper that came during that time. But before that, you'd find the Japanese word norimaki, or hybrid terms like gimchobap in the 1930s articles. Over time, especially after Korea regained its independence, gimbap replaced all of those loanwords. It was just as much a linguistic reclamation as it was a culinary one. And when I say you can customize gimbap any way you want, I truly mean that. The other ingredients are entirely up to you, so don't let me tell you how to make this. I make sure I cut everything into these uniform matchstick-sized pieces, and then they get cooked with just a touch of salt and sesame oil. The sesame oil is really important here. It's what gives gimbap its signature flavor. Another essential ingredient is the egg, and I think the egg should be cooked into thin layers from what I've researched and what people have told me. And those thin layers have to make sure that they don't have a ton of color on them. So you want to cook this nice and slow and low, so this way you have a nice, delicate, soft egg that goes into the center along with the cooked vegetables. After the Korean War in the 1950s, food was scarce, just like it was after World War II, and gimbap emerged kind of as a survival food. It was portable, affordable, nourishing, and honestly, it made the perfect lunch for people working or for school kids. By the 1970s and 80s, gimbap shifted from a survival food to a leisure food. Families packed it for picnics, hikes, and school trips, and today it's evolved again. It's still homemade quite often, but it's also commercialized. And even for me, I can go down to my local H-Mart here in Portland and buy gimbap ready to go and have it for lunch. The Encyclopedia of Korean Folklore and Culture also notes that making it does come down to the details. The rice has to be steamed properly so it spreads easily, but still has to hold its shape, and the sesame oil and salt must be mixed in with the rice, which is something I didn't do the first time I had ever made gimbap. And every ingredient from the cucumber to the spinach has to have any of its excess liquid removed before rolling, otherwise the gimbap will be super soggy. What's really beautiful about gimbap is actually after you cut it and seeing all those really vibrant colors that come from the center. And maybe that's why it resonates so much. It's practical, but it's also art. For protein, I'm using thinly sliced beef, and you can marinate it in traditional bulgogi marinade, but I'm just using a little teriyaki sauce that I had laying around. Or you can use one of the sauces from Cooking with Chaos, which I'm gonna talk about more later. Just feel free to use whatever flavors you like. Since the beef is so thin, it cooks super fast, like seconds on the skillet. I ended up cooking mine for about 60 seconds on each side, and it was done. Now the next part is just cooling it and slicing it into thinner shapes, along with the egg that I had cooked earlier. This way, everything has a nice uniform shape for when it goes inside the gimbap, and you have that really beautiful center to show off when you serve it. This is why you can't just say it's Korean-style sushi. And here's what I love about gimbap. It's endlessly personal. In Korea, gimbap changes from household to household. Some families put kimchi, others tuna, others bulgogi. Every roll tells a story of that household, and I think that's amazing. And that's what brings us back to K-pop Demon Hunters. To me, Gimbap is the most iconic food in the entire movie, except for maybe the ramen or ramyun. We see it in the airplane where Rumi just shoves a whole one into her mouth, because that's how you carb load, apparently, before going and singing and dancing on stage. Personally, I would probably throw up after all of that in singing and dancing, but you know, you do you. And when they finally get home to that Avengers-looking apartment, Mira says the thing she's looking forward to the most is sitting on the couch and eating gimbap for the next 3 weeks. To me, that's not a throwaway line. That's cultural resonance. Now, to assemble the gimbap, you take a handful of rice and place it directly onto the seaweed. The goal isn't to create a huge layer of rice. Also, make sure you keep your hands slightly wet so the rice doesn't stick to it and create an entire mess. Once the rice is spread, it's time to load up all the fillings. The order doesn't necessarily matter as long as you keep the balance right, so that way there isn't an overwhelming ingredient in your gimbap, unless you want an overwhelming ingredient and then just have whatever ingredients you want in here. Traditionally, you'd use marinated daikon radish, but since I didn't have any, I actually just put in some pickled ginger, and I love the flavor for this. Gimbap is fun and flexible. And honestly, I think it's the perfect way to incorporate maybe a fun night of making food together at home, even if you've never made it before. Once the kimbap has been rolled and sealed, just slice it into pieces and enjoy. It's that simple.
And to get a more personal take, I asked my friend Mrs. Eats how she felt about this food growing up in a Korean household.
Oh, kimbap. Yes, kimbap is one of my favorite food. Whenever sports day at school, my mom and my grandma made a kimbap. And then that was my childhood food. One of my favorite childhood food was kimbap. And whenever she made kimbap, it's a special day for me. Because kimbap itself can be a full meal. You know, they put a lot of meat, sometimes fish and an egg. So it's so filling, and you can eat endless. I don't know if you feel like that.
Now, according to Mira, she needs a bajillion calories to get through all of the concerts that they have to do. And yes, that's not a real number, but it is a number that most of us can identify with, especially when it comes to eating things like kimbap. They're so good. Imagine being able to actually eat this on stage while singing. Not me, I'm just a backup dancer. Zoe has this as her post-concert meal. But there's something else that I definitely do want to try. Now, before I get on to the next food, I want to tell you about Cooking with Chaos, my infinite recipe card system with 60 real recipe cards that you can mix and match to create over 8,000 different meal combinations. I launched Cooking with Chaos about a year ago, and it's honestly been one of my favorite projects I've ever worked on. Getting to meet you guys in person, seeing your photos, and hearing how you've been cooking with chaos has honestly been incredible. And it's what's inspired me to make the very first expansion pack, the rice bowl pack. But here's the thing, since we manufacture and ship everything ourselves, we need your help to make this next run happen. So for a limited time, pre-orders are open for the rice bowl pack at cookingwithchaos.gg. You can also grab the first edition box, which is almost gone and won't be coming back as the same box next year, so make sure you get your hands on it. Think of this as a mini Kickstarter, but directly through our website, cookingwithchaos.gg. If you're tired of deciding what to cook every night, or you just want to add some fun and adventure back into the kitchen, head over to cookingwithchaos.gg or use the QR code on screen to order the first edition box and pre-order the rice bowl expansion pack. The first edition box does ship right away. It's perfect for the holidays as gifts, so make sure you get a couple for some friends and some family. While the rice bowl pack is still in the oven baking a bit, so that's gonna come a little bit later. Honestly, thank you all for being a part of this journey, and yes, there might be some K-pop Demon Hunter inspired cards in the rice bowl pack, so make sure you head over to cookingwithchaos.gg and pre-order today. All right, let's get back to the food. One dish that we see Rumi gravitate towards is the oxtail soup, and I cannot pronounce this name, so I'm gonna put it up on screen. You know, I'm gonna try. I think it's seolantang. Probably wrong. The oxtail soup is this steamy, milky bowl of brothy soup that Rumi goes for after losing her voice. You know that this is a comfort food if that's what you're going towards for something like this. And luckily, this soup doesn't take a ton of effort to make. Now, making oxtail soup isn't complicated, but it does take time. I'm starting off with about 4 to 5 pounds of oxtail that I picked up from my local butcher, but you might be able to find these frozen at your local Asian grocery store. Next, I'm just submerging them in some water and some salt. This step is really important because the salt and the water help draw out any impurities in the bones so that it has a nice clean taste later. I'm also soaking a bit of short rib in the same kind of water solution, but traditionally you could use a leaner or a fattier cut of meat like brisket. But I went with short rib because honestly, it was on sale and it was cheaper. After about an hour of soaking the meat, you can see how cloudy and kind of gross the water gets. That's exactly what we don't want in the soup. So we're just gonna drain it off and discard it for later. Next, the cleaned oxtail goes into a large pot of water, and I cover it with water and then add an onion to it before I start the rolling boil. You don't really need any other vegetables, but I do like some onion in my soup. The key here is to maintain a medium-high boil. Unlike Western bone broths that simmer gently over a very long period of time, oxtail soup relies on the agitation. That constant rolling boil actually breaks down the collagen and marrow, creating that really signature milky white broth. It's very different than a clear bone broth you might find at your grocery store. Saleontong, or oxtail soup, is what Koreans call a guk, or a soup, and I'm sure I pronounced all of that wrong. It's made by boiling various parts of a cow for hours and hours and hours, the leg bones, the briskets, the shanks, the tongues, and sometimes intestines, until all of that collagen and nutrition break down into the water. This process goes further and further than your typical stock or bone broth, leaving the soup with that silky, milky texture that you really want. It kind of lathers the tongue in ways that regular bone broth doesn't. Koreans have always had a really deep love for soup-style dishes, and guk is an essential part of the daily table, so historians believe that some version of the oxtail soup or a simple beef bone boiled in water has been consumed for centuries. But the question is where did it actually come from? Ooh, there's gonna be some deep history in this one. We'll squat for this one. Even do a hoodie. Now, we're going in deep. One theory takes us back to the Goryeo dynasty, which is 918 to about 1392, and later the Joseon dynasty, which is 1392 to about 1910. The dish may have been originated from Seonongan. I'm so sorry. It's an altar where kings and officials prayed for a good harvest. And after these rituals, the ox was sacrificed and the meat and bones were boiled into a communal soup and shared amongst the people. But not everyone actually agrees with this. From my findings in the Encyclopedia of Korean Food and Culture, a 1992 book called Hangak, oh, this is so hard, Sikunfasosia, points out that there's a little hard evidence linking the ritual directly to the soup, calling the claim unconvincing. So even my official lore that I have found says that there are claims that maybe don't line up. What isn't disputed, however, is how important the dish became to Korean food culture. During the Joseon period, beef was highly regulated and often reserved for the state elites or people of power. That meant when an ox was slaughtered, every part was to be used. Bones, tendons, scraps, nothing was wasted. Luckily for us, we can just go down to our local butcher and get some oxtail to make soup. The first boil lasts about 4 hours, and during this time, I just add hot water as needed to keep that water level up. Otherwise, the broth reduces way too far and you end up with almost no soup. After that 4-hour mark, I end up adding the short ribs directly to the pot, or whichever meat you're going to be using for your soup. And then I boil it for another 2 hours. By the 6-hour mark, the short ribs are nice and tender and ready to be pulled out of the liquid and chopped before serving with the soup. Now at this point, I strain the broth from the bones. The liquid is super rich, it's milky, it's full of flavor. Like, this is what you should be eating every day. It's so good for you. This milky soup is going to be fantastic. Over time, what may have started as a ceremonial dish evolved into an everyday staple. It's kind of just like you would go to a ramen shop that perfects tonkotsu broth. These soup houses ran non-stop, so a hot bowl of soup was always ready for anyone who came by. Now, plating up the soup takes no time at all. I'm going to be using a bit of somen noodles or somyeon noodles. You can also use rice if that's what you prefer, but all you need to do is place it into the bottom of the bowl, and the amount is totally up to you. Then I'm adding some of the chopped rib meat that I had added earlier, followed by a generous helping of my broth and a ton of green onions with a touch of salt. Now in Kpop Demon Hunters, the girls are eating this soup with sides of banchan, so I'm serving mine with banchan as well. It helps balance out the soup because while it's super mellow and flavorful, having the banchan to me is really important for changing up the flavor.
I asked Mrs. Eats what she thought about oxtail soup.
Yeah, I like the oxtail soup very much. I actually grew up eating it a lot, especially when I got cold, when I got sick. My parents and grandparents made it a lot. And after eating the oxtail soup so long time, I was able to recover like in 2 days from the pretty bad cold. So that's something like I used to eat a lot when I got sick.
I know that this is a Korean style oxtail soup, but it really does remind me of a lot of soups I had through my childhood eating in a Middle Eastern household where we would have things like bone broth with Kpop. This just reminds me of that. It's fatty, it's rich, it's really neutral. The green onions help a lot. And in this case, it goes really well with banchan. And if you want a little more seasoning and you want to amp it up a little bit, you can have some salt on the side. But the next iconic dish is actually a dessert. The next iconic food is actually Hotteok, which is a Korean style sweet pancake that I absolutely love. Hotteok are these beautiful golden pancakes that are filled with sugar and nuts and maybe some warming spices like cinnamon. And while today we think of them as a classic Korean street food, their backstory is way more nuanced than that. Hotteok is in a way a foreign tok, meaning food made by steaming grain flour, then pounding it or kneading it in Korean. But Hotteok didn't originate as a Korean tok. The name Ho in Hotteok is often understood to mean China. So Hotteok is literally something like a Chinese tok. But luckily, just like Gimbap, Hotteok isn't all that difficult to make. I'm making a lean style dough, which is just 1 cup of all-purpose flour, 1 tablespoon of oil, 1.5 teaspoons of yeast, 1 tablespoon of sugar, and 1/2 cup of warm water that I heated up in the microwave. I'm just mixing it together and then knead it briefly by hand until it's smooth. You can do this in a machine, but that's not really necessary because it's such small amounts of dough. Now throw a lid on it and let it rest for about 2 hours until it doubles in size. Now while that's resting, I'm gonna be making the filling, and the filling is very different than what I've made before when I made the savory version. For this version, I'm using a 1/4 cup of brown sugar, 2 to 3 tablespoons of crushed walnuts or whichever nuts you prefer, a teaspoon of cinnamon, and a pinch of salt. I'm just mixing this and giving it a taste, so this way I can taste some of the saltiness so it's not overly sweet. Hotteok started to come around more and more in Korea in the 1920s during a time of major construction when many Chinese laborers moved into Korea. Hotteok was cheap, convenient, and portable. It's a perfect snack for people on the go or people working throughout their day. At that time, most people were using brazier styles of cooking versus pan frying, so it was a little bit different. It was only around the 1970s that pan frying actually started to become the dominant cooking method because of pan frying in oil. It made the Hotteok much more crispy on the outside. And this version is the version we mostly see today. By the early 20th century, and especially mid-century, Hotteok was ubiquitous in Korean urban markets, particularly in Seoul. I've even found these walking around downtown Tokyo. Picture walking through a winter street market, a little bit of snow, it's nice and cold, you walk by the Hotteok vendor pressing those dough balls filled with all the ooey gooiness into a cast iron pan right in front of you, the nuts and the sugar and the cinnamon all melting inside and just being beautiful together. The scent of that I can already smell. I can still smell it and I can taste it. People would buy Hotteok just to warm their hands, but to me, that's just an excuse to eat something delicious because yes, I can warm my hands by putting them in my pocket, but I may as well hold something amazing and get a good treat. But you don't have to go to a stall just to buy one of these. We can still just make these at home. Once the dough has doubled in size, I'm gonna just divide it into 4 even-ish pieces. This doesn't have to be perfect. I'm rolling them into small balls and then flattening them into discs and just taking a spoonful of my filling and jamming honestly as much as I can into the center of this dough ball. Then I'm just forming these and sealing them nice and tight and gently pressing them back down into the discs. To cook these, all you need is a nice sized saute pan and a little bit of oil. You wanna make sure that the heat is about a medium so you don't burn the Hotteok because these do have to cook for a little bit of time. I'm also using a greased spatula to help press down the Hotteok so they don't get too puffy. I remember someone mentioning in my last video about this that my Hotteok were a little bit too thick, so I'm making sure I press them down really well. Next, I'm giving them a flip, pressing them down again, and then throwing a lid on it to make sure that they steam all the way through. This takes about 6 minutes. It's really not that long. After those 6 minutes, these are ready to serve up, and you want to eat them when they're hot. Do not serve cold Hotteok to anybody. Admittedly, they do reheat really well just in a toaster, but they're not gonna be the same as they are right out of that frying pan, so cook them and eat them. And personally, I love that I can walk into my local H-Mart here in Portland and grab one of them right out of the freezer. Yes, it's not the same as fresh, but if I really wanted it, I can just grab the frozen ones and make these at home as a little late night snacky, you know? Sometimes you just need that in your life.
And I just had to know if my love for Hotteok resonated with my friend Emmy Richu.
So I haven't had this in a while, but I really love Hotteok. I think it's a universally loved snack, especially since you can't really go wrong with the holy combination of fried dough and sugar. And it's also a really nostalgic treat for me because growing up, our freezer was always stocked with microwavable hotteok. Not even like the good kind, it was like the cheap type that came in like packs of 10. And it obviously pales in comparison to the real stuff you get off the street carts. So if you're ever in Korea during the colder months, buying hotteok off the street and eating it outside is a requirement, specifically the ones that are filled with syrup and nuts. It's life-changing.
I wish I would have found these in Little Korea when I was in Tokyo. I just wasn't looking out for them, and now that I think about it, I'm really disappointed I didn't get one hot and fresh on a cold night over in Tokyo, or maybe one day in Seoul. But I can have it hot and fresh right now because that's how they're supposed to be served. Cheers. Oh, hot. Oh, it's so good. It's not overly filled, which is great because then you don't get overwhelmed by the sweetness. But what's interesting is the next iconic dish is shown 9 times and is never eaten once.
Hi, Bobby!
What if I told you that the next food was shown up to 9 times in Kpop Demon Hunters, but it was never actually eaten a single time? Yeah, that's what I said. What do you think that food would be? It's the Korean hot dog, or Gamja hot dog, not to be confused with an American corn dog. The roots of this dish go back much further than most of us expect, tying directly into one of the most significant eras in modern history, World War II. And if you've seen my 100 Years of Anime video, maybe you'll understand some of this. During Japan's occupation of Korea between 1910 and 1945, and later during and after the Korean War of 1950 to 1953, food scarcity was a constant struggle like we mentioned earlier. Rice had always been a cornerstone in Korean diet. Wheat, on the other hand, was super rare, and it was more of a treat than a staple like it is today. From the American standard, that seems crazy to me. What's not crazy is how amazing Gamja hot dogs are. Just like many of the dishes we've made today, Gamja hot dogs are not hard to make. They just take a little bit of effort. The batter couldn't be easier. It's 1 teaspoon of yeast, 1 cup of flour, and about 1.5 cups of water. You don't want this to be too thick or wet, so keep that balance in mind. It should just be thick enough to where when it rises, we can wrap it around the hot dogs. If it's too heavy, it just turns into dough. I'm letting this batter rest for about 30 minutes, and then it's ready to use. After World War II, the US had massive wheat surpluses. Through aid programs and imports, both Japan and Korea began using wheat flour in everyday cooking. In Korea, it led to wheat-based pancakes, breads, and fried snacks, foods that have never really been part of central cuisine in Korea before. Now, in the 1970s and 1980s, which were pretty cool times, I think, for the most part, cheap wheat flour was everywhere. It was everywhere now. With it came new street foods, which I love. So maybe thank you, wheat, but not the stuff that came before it. This is where the Korean Gamja dog was born. Again, not to be confused with a corn dog. And here's the difference. The American corn dog uses a cornmeal batter, but cornmeal wasn't actually widely available in Korea. So instead, vendors created a yeasted wheat batter. This choice was both practical and cultural. Practical because cornmeal wasn't common. Cultural because the yeasted batter produced that beautiful, fluffy, bread-like texture that fit with Koreans' growing love of bakery-style food. And if you've ever had fried bread, you know how good it is. My mouth is watering thinking about finishing these Gamja dogs. Now for the hot dogs, they're easy to put together. There's almost no effort to actually do this part of it. You're taking 1 hot dog and I'm wrapping it with a slice of cheese. A lot of the time, you'll find Gamja dogs that have a chunk of cheese at the top or bottom with the hot dog on the top or bottom, and they're just kind of flip. But I like the cheese around it. So this way you get this nice constant bit of cheese throughout the entire dish versus having a giant chunk of cheese on one end or the other. It's a personal preference, but you do you. This is how I like doing it. Once the hot dog is wrapped with some cheese, I'm using a fork to pull up some of the batter out of the bowl and start wrapping it around the hot dog and the cheese. This takes a little bit of practice. It's not too difficult, even though I'm making it look like a mess, but you can do this. After it's fully wrapped in that batter, this is where you put it into a tray of cooked potato. The potatoes I had parboiled for about 2 minutes in some water and some salt, and then cooled it down in an ice bath. Those were the only real things that I had to cook before any of this. I found the easiest way to do this is to take the hot dog that's been wrapped in the batter and place it into the panko breadcrumb first, and then kind of take some of the potato and mash it around everything, and then just cover it with the rest of the panko. You are gonna need your oil ready to go next to you, so this way you can drop them in. Now this method is what makes it uniquely Korean. Vendors rolled the batter-coated hot dog in diced potatoes before frying. Gamja literally means potato, and those crunchy little cubes gave the hot dog its iconic look. It honestly looks like a spiked baseball bat if that's what you were going for, but I think it looks cool. And they're pretty delicious. By the 1990s, Gamja hot dogs were a street food staple, and by the 2010s, they were kind of an international sensation in a lot of ways. Even here in Portland, I found a small restaurant called Honey Spicy where I could buy a Gamja dog for about $5 or $6. So no matter where you are, you can get a calorie bomb of hot dog. Cooking the Gamja dogs is straightforward. You're just gonna deep fry it in oil that's been heated to about 350 degrees until it's golden brown and delicious. Since the hot dog is cooked on the inside already, you're basically just heating it through. This only takes a few minutes, and when it's golden, you take it out. Oh my God, it's golden. Maybe that's a shirt, golden brown and delicious. I'll think about that later. To finish the Gamja dog, I'm gonna sprinkle it lightly with a bit of salt and sugar. Then I get to top it with sauces. And listen, you can sauce it with whatever you want, especially with sauces from Cooking with Chaos, my brand new infinite recipe card system. But in this case, I'm using mayo, mustard, and some ketchup. But if you wanna get really creative, use Cooking with Chaos. The Gamja hot dog isn't just food. It's a piece of modern Korean history on a stick. And in Kpop Demon Hunters, it shows up 9 times and no one ever eats it. But how do we know it's Bobby's favorite? Because of this scene right here. No one is this enthusiastic about anything in this movie except for Bobby and his 2 Gamja dogs.
Let's see if Emi Richu is just as excited about Gamja dogs.
Gamja dogs are a lot. They're really delicious because it's a cheese dog covered in diced potatoes, but it's also really heavy. So if I have a choice, I usually go for the regular cheese dogs that are just covered in sugar and ketchup and mustard. But I think Gamja dogs are best when it has a combination of both hot dog and cheese on the inside.
The Gamja hot dog is something I don't eat often. I've only ever had it one other time in the last 6 months or so, and that was from a local restaurant. Cheers. It's just everything that's right in the world. It's crispy, it's chewy, it's meaty, it's cheesy. You get the tang from the ketchup and the mustard and a little bit of creaminess from the mayo, and there's no way I could eat this whole thing. Kpop Demon Hunters is truly a celebration of Korean culture, both historical and modern. And it's one of my favorite movies, probably of all time. I'm a huge Pitch Perfect fan, for those of you who don't know, so this is right up my alley. But what I loved seeing was all of the food that the girls got to enjoy, or the food just shown in the movie. It gives everything so much more life and so much more vibrancy, and I wish more movies did this. If you guys want to see more, check out my Deadly Food of Cyberpunk 2077 video where I do a deep dive on the insanity of that world. And I want to say thank you to all of my amazing patrons, because this video and many others wouldn't be possible without you guys. And you can support for as low as $1 a month. You'll get behind the scenes footage and access to our Discord so we can chat about all of these projects. I'm gonna leave a QR code on screen or a link down below over at patreon.com/chefpk. My name is Chef PK, and remember, keep playing with your food.